Okay, what's up everybody? This is Workshop 1776. I'm Jack. Stanley is, I don't know where he is. Oh, there he is. He's over there on the ground. Today we're drinking Abita Brewing Mardi Gras Bock.
Oh, forgot about this.
We're building this. Okay, so today's project is a blanket ladder. So this is the first video in the first project series that we're making. It seems like we're getting a lot of people who are just getting into woodworking, and I remember when I was first starting out and I didn't know what projects I could tackle that wouldn't be super expensive and allowed a little bit of margin for error. So this is a really simple build, and it doesn't take very many tools. The only tools you need for this is a saw. So that could be a hand saw, a circular saw, or a miter saw. That's what I used, just because I have one. You need a drill, like one of these guys right here. And you need a tape measure, obviously. So with those three things, you can build this, you can build a blanket ladder. You technically don't even need the saw, but you could have Home Depot or Lowe's or whoever cut it for you. But, I mean, a hand saw's only like 10 bucks, something like that. So. The idea behind this project is to talk about things that you don't necessarily think about when you're first starting out in woodworking. Things about like how to measure and like how to mark your material, prepping your material to get cut and stuff like that, or selecting material at Home Depot. We'll talk through it, and hopefully you guys will learn something from this video. Try to make a blanket ladder, and like I said, I'm gonna have a bunch of these videos coming out, so if you don't want to make a blanket ladder, we have like a serving tray and a bottle opener and a bunch of other things that we're planning on doing. So if you are an intermediate, like to more advanced woodworker, not that I'm advanced, this might be a little bit in the weeds for you, but if you're new to woodworking, this should be some helpful content that I've picked up over the last like 5 or 6 years while I've been doing this. Okay, first things first. I hate when people say that. When you're at the store, this blanket ladder is made out of 3 8-foot 2x2s. They're just pine, so it's the really cheap common board. So when you're picking these out, you want to get 3 that are as straight as possible, and the best way to do that is to pull it down off the rack and then hold it up to your eye so you can look straight down the piece and you can see if there's any curve or bow or anything like that. You want to get the straightest ones you can. Usually they have a pretty good selection, but because this is like construction lumber, they tend to have some that are just really jacked up, and that's going to mess up your project, obviously. So once you get 3 pieces that are 8 feet long, as straight as possible. They don't need to be perfect, but as straight as possible. Then you bring them on home. At that point, you're going to go through all of the edges and stuff like that and make sure that there's no staples in it, and the ends. The ends usually have a lot of staples in it because that's how they, they'll staple the price tag or barcode or something like that. Now, once you've gotten all the hazards removed from the wood, because this is such a soft wood and it gets transported a lot, and it's like construction lumber, they're not so worried about having like a perfectly like flat edge. The ends can get really, really beat up. So what I like to do is I take it over to the table saw before I've even measured anything, and I give myself one really good clean edge. You can see here, I'm just bringing it over, and I'm only taking off maybe a 1/4 inch. You could take off even less if the edge isn't so messed up, but that gives you a nice, smooth, clean cut edge that's gonna be much easier when you get to things, when you're like getting to pieces like this. If this was the original edge, it wouldn't have a really good seam. So you want to just make sure that's as clean as possible. So you have to do that before you measure how long you want this thing to be, right? Because if you measure 6 feet and you cut a 1/4 inch off, you're going to be a 1/4 inch short. So what I like to do is I take my piece over and I just bring my tape measure with me. It's usually sitting over there anyway. And then I measure from after I cut it. That way I don't have to keep bringing it back and forth. So for everybody, I'm gonna put all the dimensions and everything down in the description below, so you guys don't have to like write it down as I'm talking or anything. But the vertical pieces here are 6 feet long, so I cut 2 feet off of the 8-footers, and then these rungs are 2 feet wide, or 2 feet long, which makes it 2 feet wide. From there, so now what you're gonna do is take your 8-foot section with one clean edge, and you're gonna measure from that clean edge 6 feet, and then you're gonna make a little tick mark. So after I've made my initial cut, and I really took my time measuring it out and marking it and cutting it, and I know that that piece, a lot of times I'll measure again after I've cut it just to make sure I didn't mess something up. I do a lot. So then I'll take that second piece, right? So say we cut this one, it's exactly 6 feet, we did everything perfect. Now we need to cut this one. I want this piece right here, I don't know if you can see it. Yeah, you can. That piece right here to be the exact same length as this one. So what I'll do is I'll take the longer piece and I put it down on the workbench, and then I take the shorter piece, and then you get the edges like married up as flush as possible, and you can feel it with your fingers. The best way to do it is just feel it. You can tell, you just slide it around enough to where you can barely feel the seam, and that way you know, and then you know, follow that all the way to the end, and then you take your pencil and just make a little mark on the longer piece that is right in the crease of the shorter one. So that will ensure that that piece is the exact same length as the previous piece. So you don't introduce error. Say you're an 1/8 of an inch off or 1/16 of an inch off from your first cut, you're gonna copy that same error to the second cut. And that will, even if you wanted these things to be 6 feet, but you messed up the first one and it's 6 feet and 1/8 or something, this one will also be 6 feet and 1/8 because you referenced this first one to make that second, cut. Instead of, individually measuring each one, it takes a lot longer, and 2, it's the possibility of introducing more human error, even if you did get the first one exactly correct. Now I'm looking for something. I don't know what it is. Probably my tape measure. No, not my tape measure. Okay, here I'm getting an idea of how far apart I want the rungs to be, and I didn't design this, which I would normally just design. I would design something like this, but this was not complicated. So I had like a general idea in my head, and I said I'll figure out the details later. So now I'm just marking where I want the rungs to go. What I did is I just took the 6 feet and then divided it by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 by 5, because there's 5 sections. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and that'll give you 4 lines. So what I did was I measured down at, I found whatever number that was, and I measured to it. And that number will give you the center point of where the rung needs to go. So there's a step later on that's gonna make that super easy, but just know that if you measure down a certain depth or length or something, it isn't the top or the bottom, it's gonna be the very center of the rung. Because, obviously it's not accounting for how wide your rungs are. Texting my mom, probably. Yeah, it's definitely my mom. All right, so I made those little marks, and if you ever need to transfer marks from the top, like from the one side to another face, like 90-degree face, I have this little woodpecker's mini square, and I love this thing. Because it's so small, it's really easy to use on small material like this. So like if you just stick this on there, it's like the perfect size. But if you use something like a speed square, which I don't know where mine is. If you use something like a speed square, it's so big and kind of clunky, it's easy to either get it wrong or it might not fit in the area you need it to go. So the woodpecker stuff is pretty expensive, but in my opinion, it's worth it. So like I said, if you're new to woodworking, you do not need to buy anything like this right now. But if you get into it and you like it, and down the line, definitely keep woodpeckers in mind. They make really good stuff, and I use this mini square almost every day. Okay, so sanding. Is there a leaf blower outside? Lawnmower? Leaf mower? I think we're gonna take a break. We'll come back after the lawnmower's gone. Leaf mower. Okay. Leaf blower, lawnmower, man, is gone, I think, for now. All right, I don't remember where we were. Sanding, is that what we're talking about, sanding? I think so. Okay, sanding. So I only work with pretty much 2 grits. Sometimes I'll use other ones, but for the main bulk of my sanding, I use 80 grit for like gross removal. It's really good at like flattening high points and stuff like that. Like if you are off a little bit when you do these, this seam right here, you can kind of sand down one side and it makes it a much smoother transition. And then for like finish, I use 200 or 220 grit. That's pretty much it. I don't really mess around with anything higher than that or anything in between that. I know you're supposed to, so you know, you're supposed to like run it through the grit, start with 80 and then 120 and then 220. I'm sure there's more, 330 or 320 or whatever. Doesn't matter. I just do 80 and then 220 and it works out fine. So if you're starting out, do that. If you're not putting on some kind of crazy, if you're not, you know, sanding epoxy or something like that. But sanding is really important because this is going to be heavily, you know, handled right here. So you don't want any slivers or anything like that. Also, you don't want to get, you know, little wood chunks or chips or slivers or anything in your blankets, or you don't want them to like snag when you're like pulling the blankets off of it. So this is a pretty important project to like sand pretty heavily, especially with like the quality of wood that you're buying. You're not buying really nice stuff, so it's going to be like kind of, you know, crappy. This is what I was saying about like the relation of the tape line for how long you want it and your like pencil line. So because the pencil line is pretty thick, right? Like depending on how hard you press or how dull your pencil is or how sharp it is, or if you're using a mechanical pencil, there's lots of different factors. If you just went straight down the line of that like tape line, so if you're at 2 feet and you want to cut 2 feet and you do that, it could be wider or skinnier than what you want. So you may not know exactly where to cut it. So what you can see here is I want this thing to be exactly 24 inches wide, and that matters, or long, because that matters because we're cutting multiple of them, right? So if the very top one is exactly 24 inches, and then the one right below it is 23 and 3/4 inches or 7/8 of an inch, and the one below that is 24 and 1/8 of an inch. It's not, when you line them all up, once you get to this part, they're not going to match up correctly, and it won't look very good, and you'll probably end up having to like go back and trim it. So you can see here that the left side is the side that we're going to keep, right? So we're going to cut away just a little bit of excess on that right side. So I go to the 24-inch line, and the best way to think about it is I am basically filling in a little bit of space just on the waist side. So I know that if I cut everything that is marked by the pencil and then I stop right where that pencil line is, like if I cut away the pencil and then I don't take anything away, then that piece, for this case on the left side, is the exact length that we need. Now I just cut away the pencil mark, and as long as I don't see any pencil and I know that I haven't gone to the left, in this case to the left of the pencil, then I know it's the right length. But still measure it just in case. Alright, so I'm sanding again, but not breaking the edges yet. We're gonna wait until this thing's completely assembled, and then we're gonna break the edges. Like I said before, you don't want this part right here to be rounded over. Does that make sense to everybody? You're not here, you can't tell me. So 80 grit and then 220 grit, that's what I did for all of these. And you don't have to do a whole lot either. You'll be able to feel when it's not like rough anymore. Okay, so now I'm just doing, this is called a dry fit. This isn't a true dry fit. I'm really just looking at if I like how wide these are, and which at this point it's kind of too late, right? I already cut them all. So if you wanted to do that, you should have just, I should have just cut one and then said, yeah, it looks good, whatever. And then now, at this point, these pieces, the vertical pieces, have those tick mark marks that mark the center of where we're gonna put the rungs. So right now, I'm just finding the center of each one of the rungs and then making a small little mark. I used carpenter square. You don't have to do that. That just made it real quick and easy for me. You could definitely just measure the width of it, divide it by 2, and then make a little mark. For something like this, it isn't super imperative that because they're so widely spaced, if you're off by 1/8 of an inch or 1/4 inch or something like that, it's really not going to be that big of a deal. If you're making something like, like a slatted table or something like that, you would want to probably use like a spacer or something like that just to ensure that gap is exactly the same. But in this case, mark, about the middle, and then marry up the lines that we made earlier on the vertical pieces, and then you know that the spacing is going to be the same. All right, just measuring all those. I am popular today. I have 2 friends. So basically there, I'm just transferring the marks from one side to the other because I marked the wrong side of the wood. Whoopsie. I checked for square, which in this case, it doesn't really matter all that much. They're gonna go on there how they're gonna go on there, and if they're not perfectly square, I think that's just a habit, check for square. Okay, now I'm transferring the marks like I showed earlier, so I can. So right now I marked like this face, right? So we marked this face, and then this face is marked on the rung. But I need to drill a hole that's the middle of this, right? Which we know is where this tick mark is. So basically what I did is I just took my speed square, transferred this mark all the way to this side, and then I took my mini square, the little red one, and I transferred that line, this line right here, down to this face right here, so I could get an accurate representation of where I needed to drill my pilot hole and countersink for this. So for this part, it's worth mentioning that I didn't have the correct screws for this. You probably should use 3-inch screws for this because this is 1.5 inches, and then, right? Yeah. This is 1.5 inches, and I only had 2.5-inch screws, so I wanted a little more of the, I wanted a little more screw into the rung. So I took a countersink and just countersunk it super deep, and that way it's about, the screw starts about right here, so there's quite a bit of screw into the thing. You don't need to countersink, you don't need to do anything. Pilot holes are important, especially when you start working with hardwoods and stuff like that, because if you don't drill a pilot hole, the chances that you just if you just put the screw straight in, you're gonna crack the wood. You don't want that. Nobody wants that. It's not strong, looks like crap. Okay, glue. Let's talk about end grain. End grain sucks. So you would ideally never want to screw into end grain like we did here. The only reason I did it for this project is for simplicity and so you don't have to use any other tools. You can use something called a Craig pocket hole jig. That's the brand, but they make other pocket hole jigs, but Craig is what I use. Which basically, you know what, I'll do another video on Craig. We'll do that. We'll do a pocket hole on one of the next ones. But that's another tool you'd have to buy, and they're kind of expensive. So let's think about end grain. End grain, as someone described it to me, on a microscopic level, smaller scale, is basically like a bunch of little straws, right? So there's more air than there is actual material. So when you take a screw, which I don't have, come on you take a screw and try to screw into the end grain, it's not gonna seat very well, right? As opposed to taking, and going into the edge grain like this, it's gonna be a much better hold. So that's why when you sand end grain, you take like a sander, it takes forever because you're basically sanding a bunch of the ends of straws like this versus like something like that. And then staining end grain is super thirsty, so the stain is always much darker on the end grain than it is on the face grain or edge grain. And the only reason I went, like I said, went screwed into the end grain on this for this project is for simplicity. This doesn't need to be super strong. Like nobody's gonna be standing on this. This isn't like a ladder I would ever let anyone put their body weight on. It's just gonna be blankets, and for the purposes of this project, it'll work fine. I just want you guys to know that typically you do not want to screw into end grain. You would use your pocket hole jig and you'd screw, it's an angled jig, and you'd screw from here into this one because this is into an edge grain. So that's a lot, I know. It's just kind of a bad habit, and I don't want you guys to think that that's something you should be doing on a regular basis for any kind of strength. For this, it's fine. Like I said, I also added glue to it, so it's the glue and screw method. So basically the way that works is you just put on, I use Titebond II. It's pretty much what I use for everything. This glue is water resistant, so it's not waterproof. If you want waterproof, you need to go to Titebond III, that's the green bottle. The only reason I don't use that all the time is because the open time, or how long it takes for it to like get tacky and dry up so you can continue working with the piece, it's like way longer than Titebond II. So this isn't gonna be in the rain, we're not gonna be soaking it with anything. So Titebond II works for pretty much everything except for like outdoor kind of stuff. A lot of people use Titebond Original. I've never used it, but I've heard good things. So I just put glue on there. I made sure, if you're gonna glue something, make sure it coats the entire surface. You don't wanna just put like a dab on there. You wanna pretty much coat the entire thing. And if you know you've put the appropriate amount of glue on, if you just get a little bit of squeeze out, which I'll show you how to take care of here in a minute. So I put all the glue on there. Gluing end grain's kind of tricky too because, like I said, it's like those straws. So I took the long piece, the one piece that we're fixing everything to, and I screwed it to the workbench. That way I could take the rung and like pull it into that piece and then, you know, seat the screw. So that was a good way without it like sliding around on you. You don't need the clamps, it just helps, especially if you don't have anybody in the shop to like hold it for you or something like that. Once I got all 4 of the rungs on, I just flipped it over and then I clamped the new piece down to the bench, and I did the same thing. So I use a bar clamp. I have these aluminum bar clamps from Rockler. You can see them right there, the blue ones. I use these things all the time. They're pretty expensive, so I wouldn't recommend going and buying a bunch of them right away. But if you're looking to buy bar clamps, they're pretty great. They'll be linked. But I use these because I didn't have anyone in the shop. This piece, the other vertical piece, had a pretty big bow on it because I didn't take my own advice and like took time to pick out the pieces, you know, straight pieces at Home Depot. So I use it just to kind of pull it into square a little bit, so I wasn't having to like pull this piece in and push the part that was clamped into the rungs, and then use, you know, the drill to like seat to drive the screw home. So I just pull it in a square with the clamp. By no means necessary. If you have someone who can just like hold it for you, that'd be fine. If you don't get stuff that's like perfectly straight. And then once it screws in, you can take the clamp off. Okay, and then I just moved it over to my crowded workbench, and this is the glue squeeze out trick. So if you take a straw, if you are gluing things up, and you can do this with anything really, even if it's not like a 90-degree angle, if it's just like two flat pieces, I don't know. Take a straw, and you just like crimp the end. I don't know if you can see that, but I'm crimping the end. So there's like you make like a football shape, and then what I like to do is I hold that top like point pretty much, and then you run the straw along the crease, and all the glue just goes right into the straw, and it works really well. Another thing you can do that I use actually in tandem with the drinking straw method is a like wet paper towel. So let's go to the kitchen, grab a paper towel, get it like soaked, wring out all the water, and then you can just like scrub the glue area, and the glue will go onto the paper towel and it'll clean up whatever mess you made. One reason that's important, you can't stain glue. So if you're planning on staining it, you definitely need to make sure there's no like, you know, film or like a little film of glue or something like that, because it's very distracting, and it's very, very, very obvious if you left glue squeeze out, even if it's not the beads, right? Even if it's just like a little thin layer, because it won't accept the stain, and it draws the eye immediately to it. So if you're gonna stain something, definitely make sure you get rid of all the glue squeeze out. Lawnmower's back. It's fine, I'm powering through. Powering through. Okay, so this is the part right here. You can see that I'm breaking the edges with my sander. So you can do this with the hand sander, with an orbital sander like I did, or you can even use like why are you so loud? Or you could even use like a block plane if you have one. That works too, just kind of poop. It's a nice way to break the edges. All right, after I sanded it, I stained it. And the computer gremlin ate the footage, so I'm very sorry about that, because this is supposed to be like an instructional video. Sorry, but it's really easy. I used I go to Home Depot, so it doesn't matter which one you go to. Everybody sells stains, but Home Depot sells Varathane. So this is Varathane Early American. And basically all you have to do with that is, you know, shake it up real good, stir it with the little paint stick thing, and then you use either a foam brush or a paper towel or a shop towel or something, and then you just like paint it on. And I let it sit for, I don't know, like 30 seconds to a minute. Just paint it on. It's super watery. It's not like paint. It's like painting water basically. So you just paint it on, and then use a clean towel, a clean rag, Then you just wipe off all the excess and it looks really good. So yeah, sorry I don't have the footage for that. It was like, I don't even know what happened to it. My computer had an aneurysm and was like, no. I was like, okay, fine, you win, computer. But yeah, that's it. That's the whole thing. I'm trying to think what else I was gonna talk about. I think that's it. Okay. So yeah, that, like I said, super easy project. I can't remember how much these were. Like I said, I'll put it in the link. I'll put a link down there so you guys can see with all the dimensions and everything like that. But it's really cheap. The only actual tools you need, like I said, are a saw, drill, and a tape measure. Things that would be nice are like a sander and stuff like that, but you don't have to have one. It's just gonna speed up your process. You'll need things like glue and screws, obviously, as well. But all that'll be linked down in the description, so don't worry about that. If I were to do it again, I think I would make these rungs, instead of 24 inches, I would have made them like 28 inches or 30 inches, just because like big blankets like this is most of what we have. We don't have a lot of these like little throws. We have like big blankets. They get kind of bunched up unless you want to fold them like a bunch of times, then it's like it looks stupid. So I'd make it a little bit wider because this thing wants to like fold out or whatever, but whatever, it works. Let me know if you guys make one of these. Or if you liked the video, or if I left something out, which I'm sure I did. I don't know. But that's it, man. That's the whole thing. You're done. Okay, I think that's all. So I think we should do channel update. We're at I think we're almost at 3,200 subscribers now, which is great. Like we keep just climbing and climbing. We had a little bit of a dive after the holidays. That's okay, you know, whatever. It'll bounce back. Patreon support is picking up. So I wanted to say thanks to all those dudes. Patreon helps me pay for projects like this that I wouldn't want to sell to someone. Like nobody asked me to make this. You know, I thought you guys would enjoy it. That helps me cover the materials and the time in the shop. They also help me come up with ideas and stuff. They're kind of the behind the scenes audience that helps me, the test audience that helps me do stuff. So if you guys are interested in Patreon, we appreciate all that support that they give us over there. So we have a website now where we're selling our American flags that we make. So definitely check that out. It's pretty cool, even if I do say so myself. And then I think that's it. Stanley's still useless. He's on the ground over there, not doing anything, so. That's it, beer review. Abita Brewing Mardi Gras Bock. Yeah, I like it.